All right. Jean is here. Hello. Fantastic. All right. So what we're going to be doing, I'll do a little bit of an intro and then we get to hear from the incredible Nancy Lyons. So this is mini AMA. So if you've never been to one of our events before, we run them about twice a month. It's an Ask Me Anything. So it's a monthly virtual education series that is, we invite subject matter experts on to answer your questions and we can learn from them a little bit. I'm Maria Fussell. I'm the executive director of MiniStar. And MiniStar is the nonprofit community organization built to nurture and engage those interested in technology through meaningful connection. So we run a bunch of events around town throughout the year. Mini Bar, if you've ever heard of that, which is the largest tech unconference in the Western Hemisphere. Mini Demo, and then Mini AMA. So we run these about twice a month. So if you like what you're hearing, we would love to have you for our future ones. So like I said, before I introduce Nancy, a couple housekeeping items. Please use the chat to ask questions. We have pretty much like a amazing person to ask all of your people leader questions to and all of your workplace culture questions to. Legit an award-winning person in this. So take advantage of that chat. And now, I want to, if you've never met Nancy before, so we're really excited to have her, the co-founder and CEO of Clockwork, which is an award-winning local digital agency. Nancy's a leader, a culture advocate, an entrepreneur, an all-around badass, and also author of Work Like a Boss, a kick in the pants guide to finding and using your power at work. So with that, Nancy, do you want to introduce yourself and kind of kick us off?
Sure. Thank you for that lovely introduction. There's nothing else to say. I mean, what else would I say? I just put product in my hair and told Maria it was so that I didn't look like Tom Petty anymore. May he rest in peace. I'm really happy to be here. This is the first event that I have done in cargo shorts, like a true lesbian. And it's actually my fantasy. I have to be honest with you. Also, this is not my house. It's not my house. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm all bougie. I am excited to be here. It's super weird to be in a space where I can't see anybody's face. So I'm relying on Maria absolutely for sort of the energy in the room, because I'm one of those speakers who feeds off of, the energy that I feel from other people. And I'm really happy to talk about this book because my staff will be the first people to admit that I talk about it literally all the time, because it's top of mind. It's like I just spent months sort of doing a deep dive into this thinking, and so it's top of mind all the time. And so I'm one of those irritating humans who says, well, I just wrote about that in chapter 7. So I'm really happy to have an opportunity to just talk about it. And I'm thrilled that other people are here to hear about it. And I like the Q&A part better than just about anything. I didn't bring any slides today. I thought I could tell you a little bit about why I wrote the book and sort of the process. And my notes are in bullets right here in an email, which is why those notifications keep happening. And I'm not even going to take the time to turn them off. I apologize for that. But they'll keep us all awake. They'll keep you awake. So you're welcome. I wrote the book because work is broken. And I really appreciate you bringing up the fact that Clockwork is award-winning, but that doesn't mean that Clockwork is perfect. And it also doesn't mean that everything that I talk about in this book, that the people at Clockwork have down, absolutely. Like, humans are flawed, right? And wherever there are a group of humans, there are problems, there are miscommunications, there's tension, there's issues. But I think, fundamentally at its core, work is broken, and we aren't taught how to work. Nobody teaches us how to show up in a space and contribute. Nobody teaches us how to communicate. We hope we get mentors. We hope we have leaders who make the space for us. But I'm always amazed at how much attention we pay to higher education and the importance of getting your college degree and the money we invest in advanced degrees. And yet we never teach people how to exist in a workplace. We never teach them how to show up strong and advocate for themselves. We don't teach people how to take initiative. In fact, For those of us who are on this call who are parents, what we teach people about work is very similar to what we teach people about parenting, right? It's similar to what we teach our children. Shut up, sit down, fall in line, do what you're told. And then when they show up at work and they do those things, they're actually less effective than the workplace needs them to be. So I think we aren't talking openly. We aren't teaching people about how to exist and how to thrive at work. And it's set up for the way things used to be. And I always tell this like funny story about Little House on the Prairie. When you think about it, a lot of the stuff that's sort of baked into our work DNA, was designed for us 175, 150 years ago, right? Like, we talk about the Industrial Revolution as this pivotal point in our country's history, but it's also this really interesting historical point that defined work culture and defined what we believe to be true about authority and about how we communicate with authority if we do it all. I talk about Little House on the Prairie, and I talk about how, and this is a little passage in the book. I have no idea if any of it's true. Did you watch the show?
I did.
Did you read the books?
I did. Yeah, not all.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
The big print was easy. You get through it in a night. Yeah. And it was also riveting. I mean, what's more exciting than living in a sod house through a winter, and getting, candy for Christmas or your holiday of choice? Just a single, what did they call that? Horror houndstooth? Horror hound?
Oh.
It was like some weird,
yeah.
I just said horror on this talk. That's cool. But it was like something like, it was like a particular kind of candy. Anybody who wants to throw that in the chat, I'm into it. So Little House on the Prairie, people fended for themselves in their rural spaces, right? So Pa and Ma and the Ingalls kids, they lived out in the country on the prairie. They grew their own food. They raised their own meat, and they only went into town when they had to go to the general store to pick up like fabric for a dress in case Mom needed to look exactly their dresses, or to go to the one-room schoolhouse, or to put on their Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, and they would go to the one-room schoolhouse, which had been converted to a church, right? So they didn't actually go anywhere to go to work. They took care of themselves, and then we were industrialized, and Pa moved to Mankato. And those of us on this call, we know what a bustling metropolis Mankato is. And went there to get a job, and he would send money home. And then eventually he was able to send for the whole family, and they moved there. That's the series. I don't think that actually happened like that exactly in the books. And I did read them. But he worked for someone. He had agency when he owned his own farm, and he worked at the lumber mill, and he had agency then. But when he went off and got a job, he worked for someone, and he was beholden to them. And there was this chasm between the people that owned the companies and paid the payroll and the people that worked in the organizations. And that's the way stuff used to be. And yet so much of it is still baked into how we show up every day. When you think about it, the early days of work, the industrialized days of work, were modeled after barns. We would put cows in pens, we would put people, and it was all about numbers. Like, we would pack as many people into a space, and they were measured by their output. They were measured by the number of things they could produce between sunup and sundown. And that is how we think about work still. Even though we talk a big game about how work should be, we still don't know how to actually make it different. And it's what we're struggling with. And it's why organizations are struggling. Now, I think post-pandemic, this conversation, this book is going to be super valuable, because work needs to grow to reflect the world as we know it right now. And that's really what the book is about, right? And the world has been disrupted, like massively. So we have to disrupt ourselves, right? Like, a lot of this is on us. And I think we're responsible for how work feels. I have been a boss for 25 years. And I can tell you that when employees When they don't get on the path they want to be on, they blame their boss. When they don't feel like the culture is healthy, they blame the organization. When they don't feel like they are being mentored or being guided, when they don't take initiative, and I say all of this with love, right? Like a lot of that is on managers and leaders and bosses. It is on them for sure, but not all of it. Right? Like when we abdicate that agency, when we abdicate responsibility for how work feels, then we are giving up the power that we have to actually change it. And I think most people have been bred to be passive. Most people have been bred to be like, hey, tell me what to do. It's actually a lot easier. Is it in my job description? Is it in my job description? Am I getting paid to do that? Because if it's in my job, I want that job. So how about you, manager, get me to that job? You need to so tell me what to do to get to that job. And that is how we show up every day at work, and it's not working. And as a result, I think this country is falling behind. People are confused and frustrated with work. So we're actually working around work, right? Like the gig economy is really thriving, except what do we want in the gig economy? Well, we want to go be around people. So I'm going to pay a co-working space, not right now because I don't want to be diseased, but I'm going to pay a co-working space so that I can actually be around other people. And actually it helps if my teams are around me. But no, I want a distributed team, but I want culture in that distributed team. But my manager really needs to do a better job of showing up and delivering on that culture. And these are all issues that are real. But I think when individuals don't accept their own accountability for showing up differently, we're never going to fix them. So I think that most books are written for managers. Most books are written for leaders and entrepreneurs. I wrote a book for everybody else. And the book really sort of focuses in on this idea that we're responsible for how work feels. And it's never going to be ideal. Wherever you put a bunch of people will suck, right? Any party that goes too long is a too long party. Right? So work is never going to, like we have this idea, and it's really interesting. Like when you read Entrepreneur Magazine or Inc. Magazine or, Fast Company, and they describe these utopian places. And then you go and you apply for a job there and you discover they don't exist. Clockwork, when they talk about clock for years, they would talk about the beers, that would solve all of our problems, right? There's beer here. Yes, there's beer here. Big deal. Beer's a beverage. Moving on. And I think we have this way. It's sort of how we talk about relationships. And actually, you can compare work to relationships, right? Like we talk about marriage. The way marriage is fed to women is hilarious, right? Like when you're married, gosh, it's going to be great. You'll be whole. You're only half of something now, but when you get married, all your problems will be solved and you can have babies and your life will be fulfilled. And Prince Charming, he's perfect. The line of goods that are fed to women when it comes to marriage are ridiculous. It's the same thing with work. We have this fantasy reality about work that's not true. So I think what we have to accept is it's never going to be ideal, but our mindset can be better. And growing our self-awareness and growing our sense of agency and our acceptance that we are going to fail. We're going to fall down, and blaming the establishment. I mean, unless the establishment truly sucks, and if it truly sucks, get out. Like get out. And I realize that saying that in a time of dramatic unemployment is probably not cool. But I also know that if you are talented, if you are smart, and when we come up out of the other side of this, if you take initiative, if you are creative and inventive, and you believe in that agency, there is opportunity for you, because we just came out of a job market that was so tight that employers were literally begging for help. We will return to that. And hopefully when we return to that, people will be better positioned to take full advantage of the opportunities that those organizations have available for them. So I think, we have to face our fears. And fear, frankly, is the reason that we don't do everything, right? Like fear drives so much of how we behave at work, but no one is fearless, but we can try to fear less, right? And I think, we fear conflict, and we're afraid we're not good enough, and we fear what others are going to think about us, and we fear we'll do the wrong thing, and we fear we'll piss people off, and we fear the unknown and the unfamiliar, and all of that plays into why we make a decision or why we don't. And I think we can focus on personal development at work as a critic, as critically and as thoughtfully as we consider personal development within our personal lives, right? Like, I work on my relationship, and I've been with my person for a really long time. And every day, anybody who's been in a relationship for any amount of time knows that you wake up some days and you're like, I want you to die. Like, I really, it would be swell today if you just didn't come home, right? And then you think about it for a minute and you think, no, actually, that's not what I want. We all feel that way about work. We have to put as much care and feeding into places where lots of people are, in order to improve how it feels, in order to own our own accountability. And no one has all the answers. I also think that, especially if you're a woman, we're sort of told, well, there is somebody who has the answer. Somebody has the answer. But I think all people believe, well, there must be an instruction book. There must be a manual. Oh, this guy's a CEO. He must know all the things. And they don't. I don't. We don't. We're all fallible idiots. And I think what we need is people to show up as their best selves. And we need them to commit to their own development. And, people are messy. People are messy. I think, work and life bleed together. That's something that's been established, right? Like, the internet made that true, and personal and professional stuff bleeds together. And I've said a long time ago and got quoted a lot when I said there's no work-life balance, right? There's no such thing. So stop saying it and stop fooling yourself into believing that can happen. We get value out of our identity is baked into what we do. Because we don't go to cocktail parties and say, hi, my name is Nancy, and I am a mom. I mean, we probably should, because that's probably our biggest, greatest job, but we don't say that. When people ask you what you do, and I used to really struggle with that question, right? Because just because I started a business doesn't mean my title matters. My title is for everybody else. And my partner used to get really pissed at me because we'd go to parties and people would say, and what do you do? And I'd be like, yeah, I don't know. And she would be like, what are you doing, you moron? Like, you look weird when you say that. And I'm like, well, there's some pretense to it that I'm uncomfortable with. But it's what our society says makes us valuable. It's what our society says makes us make sense to other people. But and because of that, there's no balance, right? It's all the same. And work is this giant melting pot where we're thrown with other people who are dealing with some of the same issues and some very different issues. And we don't have a lot in common with the people that are picked to work with us. We get to pick our families. We get to pick our social media bubbles. We get to pick our churches. But you don't get to pick who you work with. And that makes it even harder to sort of navigate those waters. And I also think the cult of work, like forcing us to behave a certain way, and the cult doesn't necessarily happen at the top. It happens inside of the subcultures that happen at work, right? And they sort of suggest that we have to behave in certain ways, and we have to judge other people if they're not behaving in those ways. And that also underscores the idea that we should be afraid of speaking out of turn because we might say something that doesn't reflect that behavior that's expected at work. And it just sort of supports this idea that, well, if you're different or if you think differently or outside of the box, maybe you shouldn't. And I think, when you think about sort of our education and the fact that we're just taught to conform, and work is just another place where we're encouraged to conform. And honestly, like, I always think that, clockwork is the sum of its parts, and the parts have to be smart, and the parts have to show up, intentionally and thoughtfully and strong, and that makes us better. And if we're doing it wrong, people have to speak up. I'm always intrigued by those people who only move through the hierarchy, because that's what's on paper. They only, people that sort of take hierarchy for what it is and only function within it. Like, take a risk. If everything blows up because you go to the VP or you go to the CEO, oh well, but take the risk because it can't hurt. So, and I also think, you know, we've sort of forgotten to talk like humans. And I think the technology world is particularly guilty of this. You know, there's a lot of acronyms and a lot of garbage, and we do a lot of talking. And I mean, maybe UXers and customer experience folks listen well, but we talk more than we listen, and we use a language that most people don't understand, so it's not terribly accessible. And we use that internally too. What we learn and what is effective are not necessarily the same thing. They're not necessarily aligned, and we tend to be consumed with our own experiences, and we're not very good at considering other people's experiences in conversations. And everybody, you know, goes to work selfishly. I'm thinking about my stressors and my relationship and my paycheck and my worth, and they're not thinking about the whole. And I think we as a society have gotten really good at really being individuals. And, you know, so much so that we've sacrificed the whole. And I think that's a good reason for the divisiveness that's happening in the country. Like, we don't even know how to talk to people that aren't just like us. And that's problematic, and it's problematic at work too. And what you're hearing me sort of talk through are the chapters of the book, right? The book it's pretty simple and straightforward, but I sort of start with this idea that work is broken and talk through that and provide some examples. But then I also encourage people to own their own garbage. Like, there's chapter 2 is own your shit. That's what it's called, own your shit. Because I think we are all so quick to point at every external reason for why our needs aren't getting met, every external reason for why our career path doesn't look like we want it to. And I think it starts with us, right? So any good therapist, and I live with one, will tell you, you got to start with your garbage first before you can start working on anything else, on anybody else's garbage. And then I think what we find is that our garbage is fear. So chapter 3 is about facing your fears and really understanding how to work within them or work through them. And then recognizing that other people are messy too. They're all dealing with the same garbage we're dealing. So when you put all that garbage in a bin, what have you got? A lot of garbage. And then how we talk to each other really matters. And I actually have, you know, a chapter in the book called Be Kind. Be kind. Because I think the world is getting harder to live in. And the last few weeks have proven that to be true. And the last 3 months have really created a pressure cooker for all of us. And I think it's important for us to recognize that we all are struggling, that everybody is struggling. And kindness at work matters. Listening at work, you know, there's no real secret to making work great. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an organizational development person. I think that you know, this book is a tough love tome that encourages people to start doing the things they gave up or forgot in order to fit in at work and behave enough to be seen and promoted. And behaving isn't doing us any good, really. So the whole book is really encouraging self and misbehaving. Thank you.
I love that. Well, there's so much to unpack there. We've had a couple questions come through. And everyone else, please, you know, we're going to be moving into the Q&A portion. So use the chat, throw questions on here for Nancy, and we will pick them up as we go along. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot from you and your experience, though, is it sounds like you as a leader, you know, all the years of experience that you have and at Clockwork are pretty self-aware when it comes to like power dynamics at work and how to like make sure that your teams have agency to be their best selves. So that leads into one of the questions that came in through the chat, which I think is phenomenal. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So what's the intersection of agency with identity? So do all folks have the same space to move culture and influence? I don't disagree, just wanting to know more if this approach is created for all people. Specifically, are people of color in charge of moving the culture so it's less oppressive to them?
So, you know, in the book, I talk about the spaces being made for white men, let's be honest, right? Like all the spaces all of us move through. And let me just let me just back up a second and say, one of the things I'm most proud of in the book, and I wrote it obviously before the stuff the last few weeks and before COVID, right? So I wrote this just out of sheer frustration with humanity and work. And I don't work in a big organization, but I work with clients who do. And I see what clown cars they are. And I see how oppressive they are. The air is thick. Like, the reason that Clockwork gets accolades is not because we're perfect. We are entirely flawed. You know, we're a small business. We're always juggling budgets. I wish I could write bigger checks than I do. You know, we have our own set of issues, but we try to be respectful. It's that simple. And I've always said that for some reason, people don't know how to articulate the things that really matter at work. So we say that it's that free beer, and it's the stuff in the refrigerator, and it's the lunch you buy for us once a month, or it's my professional development budget. But really what it is the stuff that's intangible. And it doesn't show up in the surveys for the best places to work. And it doesn't show up and sometimes we fail, but for the most part, we really try to be respectful. And in my observations of those other organizations, like, I think that we have, you know, we sort of acknowledged our failures as an anti-racist organization, our failures as our anti-racist organization about 4 years ago, and really put into play a real effort in the last 2 years. So I think this question is particularly interesting because most organizations haven't begun to confront those realities, right? And some of them are still going to take a long time to get there, and I'm sorry for that. So I think that this issue of identity is really important because, for a number of reasons. I think that our instinct, white people's instinct, is to lean on people of color in moments like these to tell us what to do. So I think that agency is going to show up in inappropriate ways, where we are going to put the emotional burden on people of color to help us figure out how to change. I think instead we should be listening and centering those voices. And I think that is the agency that those people have, is, you know, the opportunity right now to say, these are my boundaries. I want to be involved in structural change inside this organization. I want to be a voice that is heard, but I'm not going to do that work for you. I think that there are HR departments, talent development departments. I think there are team leaders and managers who would be very open to hearing that kind of real talk. Now, if the work is something you want to be involved in, great, but I don't want to be someone who assumes that the load that needs to be carried in most white-led organizations wants to be carried by people of color or should be. But I acknowledge that most of these systems that we're working in were made by white men, and they were made by and for them. So most of us, you know, most of us women, people of color, queer people, the fact that I used the word queer is, you know, only in the last 5 years have I felt comfortable using that. Do you know why? Not because I didn't call myself that before, but because corporate America had no room for it. And I think those of us that do have privilege need to bust those doors down and then invite other people through the door with us. So I say queer, not because it's that important to me. I'm old, I could give a shit. My life is, you know, pretty well decided at this point, but other people deserve the right to their identities. And those of us with privilege have got to sow, or till, is it still tilling, sowing, hoeing the path, right? So I think that's a really interesting question. I also think culture and influence move when people work together. So if as an individual, you are feeling unheard, I think starting to voice those issues with those people around you. And I also think, you know, I also think how we show up is entirely on us. So being a person who, I think any person, and I say this as a queer person, and I acknowledge that people of color have a different experience, but I think any person who wants to be part of change has to open themselves up to the conversations around it and participate to the degree that they can be safe, to the degree that they feel safe, or can create safe spaces for others. And I know that that's not an absolute answer to the question, but I would be a ridiculous human being if I said, hell yeah, bust those doors down. That being said, I think now's the time. I mean, now's the time.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We have another question coming in from Amy. Amy said, I have $500 for professional development. It's fairly loose on what it can be used for. How can I best use it for my own personal growth, but also as a project manager?
Oh, personal growth, but as a project manager too. Well, it depends on the direction that you want to take your personal growth. If you told me that I had $500 for professional development, I would use that for 20 lunches with 20 of the best project managers from different and leaders from different organizations. Frankly, I think that finding a one-size-fits-all $500 workshop is practically impossible. But out of those 20 lunches, let's be honest, you're going to buy salads. Lunch is always salad, right? Out of those 20, two-person salads, you will find 3 people that will be lifelong mentors and friends. And I think if you can get your organization to allow you to spend the money in that way, your career is all about who you know. And that's the bottom line. It's impossible to bubble up on Indeed. It's impossible. Like your resume will be seen, but we all know that once you hit a certain point in your career, it's talking to other people inside of organizations that are of value to you or appealing to you or interest to you. And the humans that advocate for you are the most valuable humans that'll show up in your career. So take that $500 and make advocates for yourself. But don't just pick people who tell you what you want to hear. Pick people who will challenge you to show up differently. Maybe you're passive and maybe they want to, maybe you pick people who will encourage you to speak when you normally wouldn't, or pick people who will challenge you on how you approach projects or communication, or pick people who will pick apart your biggest failure with you and find the biggest lessons in it. Personally, I just think those connections are the most valuable thing you can do for your professional development.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So we have another question, and actually this is really interesting. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this because after having written this book, if you find that some of the kick in the pants feedback is more or especially applicable to us in the upper Midwest, of where maybe feedback is a little bit more passive rather than direct. So the question is, advice.
Oh God.
No.
Question, the buildup. Advice. It's totally anonymous, so.
Yeah, advice for the conflict averse on how to provide good and timely feedback.
Yeah, so there's a whole section on feedback. And so let me answer the first part of your question. First of all, I think that the Midwest is particularly horrible at conflict, but I think people are. I mean, again, that's another thing we're not taught to do well. Women for sure aren't taught to do it well. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of those. I talk in the book about how some of my favorite people are white men and how I grew up in a white men neighborhood. And I'm fine with them, but I do talk about them sometimes. And I try to point out the distinctions because I don't think we do it enough. But I don't think the Midwest has cornered the market on passive aggression. And I think that I've gotten feedback from, and my readers are from everywhere. Like I have people on the West Coast, on the East Coast that have pre-read this book, and the feedback I get is always the same. One of my endorsers actually said, and I kept it, he thought maybe he went too far, but he said that I grabbed the reader by the scruff of the neck and shake them, which I wouldn't actually do. So, you know, there's some tactics in the book, there's some tools in the book that help people think about how to approach the conflict averse, or if they're conflict averse, how to approach conflict. So there's some tactics that I'll let you read through. See what I did there? But I think that the most important thing you can do to move through conflict in a healthy way is, one, to subscribe to the belief that it's necessary to get to a better product. Two, have empathy for the person that you are in, person or people that you are in conflict with. Everybody, you know, no, certainly there are shitty people at work, right? There are bad people who do bad jobs, and they come and their whole reason for living is to make your life miserable. But I want to believe that the majority of people aren't punching in to do that. So they have their platform, right? So bring empathy to the discussion. The other thing, and this is a disarming thing, I wrote about it in my first book about project management. I included it in this book again, because I think it's so important. When you approach a difficult conversation from the perspective of someone who needs help, understanding, you know, moving an idea forward, getting support, whatever it is, and you ask for help, most humans are likely to want to show up for you. So it disarms, it takes away a lot of the tension. And that is a piece of advice that I got from a mentor many years ago, that instead of, you know, we believe that if we're going to have conflict, we come into the conversation like, Maria, you are wrong. What the hell were you thinking when you did X, Y, and Z? And what does that do to you, Maria? It automatically puts you at a, hold on, yeah, I'm not here for this, and F you, and whatever. And that doesn't move the conversation or the issue forward. But if you believe that you are all working toward the same end goal, and you're all interested in success, and you can actually share it, that's something else the book talks about, right? Like, share the success. Like, we have a desire to sabotage each other because we were taught, like, when not only were we taught to conform, but we were also taught that in order to get ahead in life, other people have to not get ahead. In order for us to succeed, other people must not succeed. And I don't buy that for a minute. So going into a conversation to destroy another person isn't going to make the outcome great for either one of you. But going into a conversation to provide critical, honest, necessary feedback with empathy toward a shared end goal, and asking for help in understanding or getting support for your idea, shifts the dynamic and makes it more possible for both parties to participate in that feedback. And there are other fun tools like that in the book. And again, I live with a therapist, so I did consult my therapist partner about some of these things as I was writing them. But I do think that, you know, using those tools and approaching things we don't have to tear people down to provide feedback. I don't have to make you feel like shit, you know, to give you feedback that will make you better and make us better by extension. So that's just, you know, people are hard.
Yeah, but I love that. And I also love the idea of timeliness, right? I had a mentor that, you know, said everything in a performance review should be review. Nothing should be no new news. Everything should be just like, hey, remember we talked about this? And remember, you know, like, because people hate being blindsided and they can't course correct. And then you made a little thing into a huge thing 8 months later, right? We have a good question from Lauren. So Lauren says, phenomenal talk, entirely refreshing. 2 questions. Number 1, how do you test the health of your culture in your organization? Is it just your own internal barometer, or is there an established system that you use? And number 2, if it turns out to be unhealthy at some point, how do you heal your people and culture?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lauren. So I think it's a variety of things, right? Like I need a team around me that is in tune to the people and not so caught up in hierarchy. And we've made mistakes where that's concerned. Like I have certainly had people on my leadership team who have been so all about leadership that we have missed, you know, good thinking, good ideas, and we've shifted that around. And I think part of proving to the people you work with that your intention is to hear from, and we're a small company, so to say every level of the company is ridiculous, right? Like I want to hear from people, and I think people have to believe me when I say that, and take me up on those opportunities. But I think I personally do have a barometer for it. So the people that I work really closely with will tell you that I have a spidey sense, and I can tell when things are on, and I can tell when things are off, and when people are happy or unhappy. Now, because there are managers around me to manage the people, I have to empower them to do that. And sometimes that's hard on me because my deal is I can feel when people are off, either virtually or physically, and I want to fix it. I'm a fixer. Mm-hmm. And that undermines people too, right? So my desire to just, hey, get out of my way, I'm going to fix this, has actually been problematic. So I do think having people who are sensitive and empathic, to the true responsibility of managing people is really important. I also think having mechanisms for people to provide critical feedback about the organization is also important, and then wanting to hear it. Most people send out surveys, but they don't really give a shit about the answers, right? Like I know plenty of people who lie on their surveys. I know plenty of people who just pay lip service because they don't think that anything will happen if they answer those questions honestly. So I think the organization has to commit to actually caring about the feedback that they get from people at all levels of an organization, and they have to commit to taking action, and then the people have to see that their voices matter. I also think that, my child is 13 now, he doesn't speak much. So I have to rely on all sorts of other ways to determine his emotional and mental health, right? Because when I say, hey, how was school? What are you doing? Mom. That's the entirety of all of our conversations. Mom, stop. And, that's cool, but he's still my son and I still have a job to do, right? The same can be said at work. Like, I think we have to get better at recognizing that there are a number of channels for assessing health of an organization. Now, we used to do a, 2 or 3 question poll, once or twice a week. I personally got survey fatigue, and just before the pandemic, actually right after, I think we just shut it down because I figured I would just be getting answers of how miserable people were, we're actually really sad and everything sucks. And getting that a few times a week is not good for me. But I think it's about establishing empathy, establishing kindness, establishing listening as core to how you work. I think it's about making promises that you keep. So I always talk about my open door policy. Some people take advantage of it. Some people really do not. And I think that's partially because people bring their own baggage about what they believe my job is or what they believe a CEO does. And so they don't actually believe that they should come to me. But it really helps me when they do because I want to hear that. I also think it's on organizations to receive feedback and not retaliate. A lot of organizations get like, well, we're not like that, so clearly you're not a fit. You know what I don't want? I don't want a fit. I want somebody who will challenge us and make us better. That's always who I want to add to the organization. So I think it's all these sort of human qualities that are necessary at every level of I also rely on other people to come to me and say, you know what, so-and-so's having a rough time. So-and-so doesn't feel like, and that is really helpful. And when I start hearing it from a given team or, a discipline, then I know I've got a bigger problem and I have to address it. And my way of fixing, I work for a small company, right, is always addressing it head on and talking through how to remedy what people are feeling. So if it turns out to be healthy at some point, unhealthy at some point, how do you heal the people and the culture? You heal the people and the culture the same way you heal people in any context. That is listening, really hearing, valuing their perspective, and taking their feedback and and creating action as a result of that feedback that is seen and felt by everyone. Now, not everybody is always right. And my job is particularly hard sometimes because I can't do things just because everybody, somebody wants me to. I have to make decisions based on the mothership. And I always say, those of you who are on this, who are UXers, you know that we create optimal performance. You are the people that know we can't make everybody happy all of the time. That is not possible in the universe. But my job is to create an optimal experience for the majority of the people that I work with. Optimal. It's down the middle, right? And in order to do that, I have to hear from them as a whole. I have to hear from individuals. I have to have channels of communication open for people to tell me how it feels to really be there, because I'm not them. I don't know how it feels. And I have to listen. And when necessary, I have to take action that is seen and heard and felt. And at the end of the day, we all know how to make other people feel valued. We do. You do. It's why you have primary relationships and friendships. When you see them, when you hear them, when you value them, when you respect them, they know it. And that's true whether it's me, like the CEO. We always say, when your boss tells you you're doing a good job, it feels so good. Screw that. If anybody tells you you're doing a good job, you feel good. If anybody sees you, we are living in a country of how many million, hundreds of millions of people. Most of us are just blips. To be seen and heard and respected and valued, that's what means, that's what plays into a healthy culture, and that can come from anybody. It doesn't have to come from the top. And that is what most organizations need to encourage.
I love that, because what I'm hearing from all of the different examples is really how to build trust, because there's such a vulnerability in going to the CEO and going to your manager about, issues that you're having, and the laying the foundation and also the follow through really underpins that whole trust thing. I think that's beautiful. I love that.
Well, and I also think, if I have managers that are not listening to people, they cannot be here.
Right.
They cannot be here. They are an extension. Every single person is an extension of the values. If I have people who aren't hearing people and making time and space for people to feel safe and tell the truth about what they're experiencing and what they want for themselves, and stand in that agency, then they can't be here. And sometimes it takes a long time for me to realize that I've got those people. But eventually I realize that every single person has to do what I would do. And that is value others.
Mm-hmm. That was a great question by Lauren.
Yeah, really, Lauren, call me.
Tanya has a question. How can we best advocate for needed change in an institution when those at the top seem uninterested in change? My institution needs to do a better job of recognizing and making improvements with regard to diversity in particular.
Hello, Tanya. I know Tanya. So I happen to know the institution that Tanya's talking about, and I think that, the bigger, more established the institution, and especially there are certain types, right? Like there's corporate, there's the big giant nonprofits, there's academia, and they're all entrenched in history, and that history is heavy, it's weighty. But I think what isn't deeply entrenched and what can bubble up and make, and it's iterative, right? We're living in an agile world, so nothing is going to happen overnight, but we can go in sprints. So if you think about change in an agile way, think about your team or your microculture. What do you work? What's the context in which you go to work every day? Or, in this case, Zoom in every day. I think that's where you start to make change, is in that microculture, where you can have honest conversations, you can influence how you hire, you could establish core values that reflect perhaps the values of the greater organization in a real and true way. And I always tell people data tells a story. So if you have a happier subculture or microculture, if they're answering those surveys in a way that suggests something magical is happening across this organization in these little pockets, if they're more productive, more effective, if they're showing up in ways that the data can capture, you can ultimately influence a larger piece of the organization. I do think that the issue of diversity is one where right now we have an opportunity to be louder than we have ever been. So I do think that if you are feeling pushback around the issue of diversity, or, you know, or if the reality is that you are not in a place that creates a safe space that is inclusive, and inclusion is really about creating a sense of belonging, right? Like, we want to be inclusive of all humans so that we get their best work. I think there's an opportunity right now at this moment in time to speak to the value of what it means to understand inclusiveness and creating that belonging. I do believe, and I sit on a lot of boards. I've been writing a lot of notes to a lot of people about, and really calling people out. I don't like to do public call outs, but I'm a real big believer in calling people out for whitewash language. Like right now, this moment in time, we need to get real, honest, and direct in our communication. And so I think the word diversity is actually kind of whitewashed. I think we have to get, because that suggests the old regime, which is numbers. We just want more people of color working here, and that'll prove that we're good people. No. We want to change the hearts and minds of the people that work here, shift the attitude and the energy, and attract the talent that reflects the communities we live in, we work in, we serve, we make product for, and we want them to feel whole and seen, and we want their talents to be tapped absolutely in these organizations. And in order to do that, right now, we have to call out our organizations if they aren't showing up for that tough ass conversation and really investing in anti-racism. We have to. We have to. It's necessary. So I think there's your question is multi-layered, Tanya. Call me later. We'll talk about it. And I think it's a really good one. But I think you can create change in a microculture. You can prove that it works. You can have a respectful environment that expands because other people see it, and respect is infectious, right? And you can use your voice in a louder way to demand that change happens. Because I happen to know you're white, right? We're white. White people have a moment right now where we can say, actually, I don't want to be here unless we take a stronger stance on what it means to show up here every single day.
Thank you for that. I want to let everyone know we have 7 minutes left. So any last questions, throw them in the chat. While we have questions coming through, this is another question that is a little bit more time of COVID related. So the question is, how do you maintain a healthy, connected, and supportive workplace culture remotely?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. I think it's different depending on the size of the organization. So first of all, I don't think it's not possible. I don't think it's impossible to have a healthy culture in a distributed workforce, right? Because it's just people and connections. I think, we're doing all this reading. I am on the board of my son's school, and what we're realizing is that the teachers have a very different connection with students. That interpersonal connection that they have with kids that's so important is missing in virtual. But it's also because those kids, they're trout, right? Like any little shiny object and their stuff shifts, their attention shifts. But I think it really requires intention. Like, we have to be intentional as team leaders, as managers, but as humans, like individual humans. And I think these are conversations we have to have from day one. They have to reflect our values. And I think we have to, at Clockwork, we've gone through a lot of change in the last few years, and we now have these 5 client-facing agile teams. And in some ways, it's really interesting for me as a leader because they take care of each other. Those teams take care of each other. So they are a reflection of the values, but they're also sort of checking. So they're distributed, but they're taking care of each other. And so what we're hearing about is where they need support. And that, to me, is actually really cool. We've never really seen that before. And now I'm thinking more and more about how to expand on this distributed workforce. How can we pull people in other markets? How can we make this, really true, and how can we integrate this into our going forward thinking? Because what we managed to do in a physical space, we have now encouraged in the virtual space, and we're actually getting more timely feedback because we have these like weird co-working coffee Zooms where people just sit and look at each other while they're working. And it's not like an event, they're just hanging out so they can see each other. And then from those, there's these little offshoot connections that people are having. And then what we hear about is the good and the bad, right? Like as a leader of a company, generally speaking, and I often lament this, all I ever hear about is when shit's off the rails. Nobody ever says, wow, everybody's having a great day today. They always say, this client is unhappy, this budget is over, these things are. So my life, I've said to my leadership, my life actually sucks. Like, I hope you're happy because you all get all the good news, but I only get the bad news. But actually with the distributed, we're taking such a different kind of care of each other that I hear more good news than I've ever heard before, because we're recognizing now we have to communicate that with each other. We have to share all of that information with each other. So I do think when we start to put the onus for culture on individuals and we stop expecting that, oh, the management will tell us how it feels here, when we recognize that we're all responsible for how it feels, and we recognize that in these virtual contexts, we kind of are responsible for taking care of each other. When we start to actively do that, we are contributing to a healthy culture, and we're actually making culture true in a distributed environment.
Love that. I love the intentionality there. We have one final question. It's from Melissa. So Melissa wants to know, would love your perspective on what actions you recommend for anti-racist work in your organization.
Yeah, so I actually just released a statement last week that you can find on the Clockwork website that speaks to the race equity plan that we released to the whole staff like 2 years ago, year and a half ago, and the roadmap that we've been on. So that's an easy question, because if you go to clockwork.com and you scroll down the homepage down there, there's a letter from me, and you can link into just sort of the high level activities that we've done to start moving toward anti-racism.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who has been able to join us. Nancy, is there anything else that you want to, final thoughts, anything you want to plug?
I mean, my book.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're aware, friends, but I wrote a book called Work Like a Boss. It's a kick in the past guide to finding and using your power at work, and you can pre-order it right now, and I'll sign it directly on my website at worklikeaboss.com. You can pre-order it there. Otherwise, it'll be on Amazon and everything else, and keep a lookout, because when it comes out physically, I'm going to come out physically. I don't know what that means, but when the physical copy of the book is in my hand, we will be having all sorts of events. And I've also got a reviewer circle. If you're interested in reading the book and providing a review for it, we're actually inviting people to participate in that right now. And you can sign up for my newsletter at nancylyons.com.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you everyone for joining. We're going to take some of those tidbits and you'll get links to that via email. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again, Nancy.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, bye-bye.